In this video I will be recapping the chapter 64 of this manhwa called Revenge of the Iron-Blooded Sword Hound. The swordsman with the iron blood, the owner of Baskerville, one of the 7 families of the great empire, Hugo the Baskerville, the best swordsman in the empire who expelled the barbarians far beyond the borders and also exterminated hundreds of monsters. Once Hugo decided on a direction, he never looked back. He was truly known as a man with iron blood, but now Hugo's feelings began to tremble as he saw the little girl in front of him. Hugo was speechless when he saw the Pomeranian's face. The Pomeranian hugged Vicar with all her strength and tearfully told him that she was very scared, leaving Vicar both shocked and confused at the same time. Tears streaming down her face, the Pomeranian looked at Hugo again, then started crying once more and told Vicar that she was very scared of that man's mustache, leaving Chihuahua speechless. Upon seeing the situation, Vicar quickly intervened and asked his father to calm down. Nervously, he also explained to Hugo that she was a little girl he had personally brought for an errand. He also explained that initially when he saw her red eyes, he thought they were a family trait, but later after investigating he found out that she was from a border tribe. Vicar also told him that there was no chance she was someone known to their family, leaving Hugo speechless. Hugo quickly calmed down, and then put his hand on his head and thought that he had made a mistake since if Penelope were still alive, she couldn't be the same age as the little girl. Hugo stood up and started heading towards the exit, deciding to go back home as he was quite tired. At that moment Vicar looked at him intently and somewhat nervously asked him to be careful. He thought to himself how Hugo, a person with the soul of a sword master, was so surprised to see Pomeranian, so Vicar quickly came to the conclusion that there was definitely something there. Hugo turned around and asked Vicar to attend the grand banquet tomorrow. Upon hearing Hugo's words, Chihuahua was confused and thought to himself that the grand banquet was a dinner where only a very small number of immediate family members gathered. He also thought that the dream of every lower Baskerville was to attend the banquet. Vicar said goodbye to Hugo, telling him that they would see each other tomorrow. Just before leaving through the door, Hugo looked at the Pomeranian once again, who was in Chihuahua's scarred arms. That same night, Vicar placed some pillows on his bed and covered them with sheets while he lay down on the floor next to the bed. With an empty stare, Vicar thought that after washing himself with hot water and lying on the soft bed, he felt uncomfortable and couldn't sleep. He started to wonder if this was due to the influence of the 2 years he had spent with the Balak warriors. He also thought that the influence of the warriors would be ingrained in him for some time. He thought that Hugo's reaction had been quite unexpected. Based on his previous reaction to the incident with the Pomeranian and the amulet, he had to make a decision. After the grand feast tomorrow, he planned to hint to Hugo that Pomeranian might prove to be a good card for him to strike a decisive blow. Either way, he had to do it in a way that wouldn't harm the Pomeranian. Vicar closed his eyes to sleep, but at that moment, the curtain in his room moved. The vicar quickly realized that something was wrong. His senses did not fail him as a hooded woman entered his room. The woman slowly unsheathed her knife and approached Vicar's bed. At that moment, a voice told the woman that less than a day had passed since he had returned, but news traveled fast. Vicar placed one of his hands on the bed and, using the momentum, delivered a powerful kick to the hooded woman. The woman managed to dodge the kick at the last second, but in the process, she dropped her knife, which flew and embedded itself in the wall. In the blink of an eye, Vicar placed his hand under the hooded woman's throat, but at that moment, the woman quickly asked him to wait a minute. She began to tell him that it was just a joke. Upon hearing the woman's voice, Vicar immediately recognized her. Vicar moved closer to the woman's face and asked her to request a formal meeting from now on, as he could have accidentally killed her. The woman replied that sleeping on the floor disguised as a pillow was a strange sleeping habit. The woman slowly started to remove her mask and told Vicar that even if he died and came back to life, nothing had changed about him. After removing the mask, the woman greeted him, and Vicar looked at her and asked her not to cause a scene by calling her by her name, Cindy Wendy. She began to approach the bed and asked Vicar if he had sent her to Chihuahua, and she also asked him how he had known that she was going with the girl who received 10 billion. Vicar began to put on his shirt and replied that trust was generated by increasing wealth. He also added that he had taken note of her behavior pattern in order to eventually ignore it all. Cindy Wendy sat on the bed and told him that robbing him was rude. She also explained that as a financial planner, the only thing she did was receive unemployment bonuses. She also explained that if it weren't for her, all the $10 billion that Judy received would have been wasted. Vicar denied her words by telling her that bodyguards had been added to prevent that. Cindy Wendy, somewhat confused, asked Vicar if there was no way the bodyguards could do something like that. Vicar revealed to her that financial experts had also been assigned among the bodyguards. He himself had given orders to filter various traders. Cindy Wendy, somewhat surprised, asked if he was referring to those bodyguards. Vicar looked her in the eyes and reminded her that he himself had ordered her to let them get close. She immediately realized that Vicar had been playing with her from beginning to end. As Vicar was fixing his hair, he asked Cindy Wendy what information he had requested. She reached into her suit and pulled out envelopes with information and handed them to Vicar. Seeing this, he thought that her personality hadn't changed much in the past 2 years. He asked Cindy Wendy to place it in the file next time and send it instead of hiding it in her suit. In exchange for this information, Vicar decided to fulfill his promise to build a bridge for trade with the natives. Cindy Wendy replied that from now on she would have to call him boss. As Vicar looked at the envelopes, he thought to himself that these envelopes contained information about the people who would attend the banquet tomorrow. He also thought that since he had made a contribution, he hoped to be invited to the banquet. According to the information in the envelopes, the people who were going to attend the banquet were Hugo Le Baskerville, holding the patriarch rank with the status of Marquis with the military prestige of Swordmaster. Upon seeing Hugo's envelope, Vicar thought that there was no need to check the information about him, but upon opening the following envelopes, he was shocked and asked Cindy Wendy if these people were also going to. The envelopes contained information about Boston Terrier Le Baskerville with the rank of captain of the Pitbull Knights Senator. With the status of count, the highest-ranked military prestige according to the information, he was Hugo Le Baskerville's half-brother. He also hated being tied to any place and had a very aggressive and unruly personality. The other envelope contained information about Great Dane Le Baskerville, a captain of the Mastiff Knights and a senator. With the status of count, the highest-ranked military prestige, he was Hugo Le Baskerville's half-brother. He didn't get along with anyone, but had a particularly bad relationship with the Count, Boston Terrier. Vicar became somewhat confused upon seeing this since these people usually didn't attend family events. He asked Cindy Wendy what was going on. Cindy Wendy replied that they were coming to see the young Baskerville legend who had returned alive. She also assumed they would come to take Vicar to their nightly orders. Vicar started looking at the other envelopes and told her he was sure he would be quite tired tomorrow. Among the envelopes, he saw one that contained information about Osiris Le Baskerville, a representative with the status of Viscount and the highest-ranked military prestige. He was Hugo Le Baskerville's eldest son and was currently the first heir of the family. Upon seeing this, Vicar asked Cindy Wendy if Osiris was also going to attend. She explained that Osiris was the eldest son of the Baskerville family. Growing and replicating Hugo's past, his sword skills were already on par with the 7 counts, and it was estimated that he would soon reach the level of Swordmaster. Vicar thought that before returning, he had seen Osiris several times from afar. He was a quiet and cold person who didn't even greet his subordinates or his younger siblings in the direct lineage. Cindy Wendy asked Vicar if, excluding the patriarch and the 7 counts, Osiris would be the strongest of the Baskervilles. She began to wonder if Vicar was stronger than Osiris. Vicar advised her not to try to guess his fighting power at a glance. Among the information in the envelopes, he saw information about a person who he had heard was receiving training in a closed facility. He started wondering if this person would briefly come out to attend the banquet. This person was Seth Le Baskerville, a consul of the underdog city and a member of the Chamber of Representatives. He held the status of Viscount and had an intermediate-level military prestige. He was Hugo Le Baskerville's second son and was currently the second heir of the family. His talent for sword is Endling was far behind his elder brothers, and he had been particularly sickly from a young age. His personality was not typical of a Baskerville, as he was gentle and kind. When he was young, Hugo would chase him for being weak. He was the only one who shed tears for the hounds that died like trash. He was the only respectable person in Baskerville. Vicar thought there must be a reason why he had to meet him. After reviewing all the envelopes, Vicar forcefully left them on the table and told Cindy Wendy that these were unexpected names. Cindy Wendy, somewhat confused and angry, explained that she had done a lot of research and also asked why he had rushed to look at them. Vicar simply replied that he knew them better than anyone else. He thought to himself that there would be a great feast tomorrow. He started staring at the envelopes, and with a smile, he told Cindy Wendy that many fun things were going to happen tomorrow. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Hello everyone. In this video I will be recapping the chapter 65 of The Man Who Revenge of the Iron-Blooded Sword Hound. The next day, Vicar began to make his way toward the grand banquet hall. After several minutes, he arrived at the door of the grand banquet hall, which was guarded by 2 guards who were creating tension in the atmosphere. Vicar started to approach the door and stared at it intently. After several seconds, he began to slowly open the door, further increasing the tension in the room. Upon opening the door, a bright light dazzled his face. Once the intensity of the light subsided, he saw Hugo sitting on the seat of honor. Beside him was his butler. On Hugo's left side sat his children, and on his right side sat his brothers. The butler informed everyone that Vicar van Baskerville was also going to attend the grand banquet as ordered by the head of the family. Everyone turned towards the direction where Vicar was. First, Settler Baskerville turned, who had dark circles under his eyes and looked quite tired, but despite this, he smiled at him pleasantly. Then Osiris turned, who simply looked at Vicar with one eye. Then Highborough, Middleborough and Lowborough turned, who started looking at him with admiration. Then the Great Dane turned around, who was somewhat surprised to see Vicar attending the grand banquet, and finally the Boston Terrier turned around and while resting his head on his fist simply smiled at seeing Vicar. Vicar placed a hand on his chest and closed his eyes to thank Hugo for the invitation to the grand banquet. Hugo stared at him intently, and while his eyes were shining, he called Vicar, son, and asked him to come to the table and sit next to his brothers. He approached and sat at the table, and the grand banquet began. First, everyone started with the main course, which was meat. They all started eating without saying a word, creating tension in the atmosphere. The servants stood behind Boston Terrier's chair and watched as the tension in the room began to increase every second. The first person to break the tension was Boston Terrier Le Baskerville, commander of the Pitbull Order. His plate had 4 pieces of sliced meat. He asked everyone if the meat was undercooked. Hugo became somewhat confused, looked at Boston Terrier and asked him if he didn't like meat. The Boston Terrier smiled and replied that it wasn't what he had meant to say. He then pointed with his hand to the person sitting next to him, who was struggling to cut the meat as it was quite raw. The Boston Terrier explained to Hugo that he was referring to the meat on the plate next to him. The person sitting next to him was Great Dane Le Baskerville, commander of the Mastiff Order, who was a bit annoyed. He asked the Boston Terrier what else he was dissatisfied with. The Boston Terrier stared at him and replied that he had never thought he would eat raw meat. He also added that it was as if he was trying to eat his adorable nephew raw. The Great Dane also stared at him and admitted that Vicar seemed cute, but reminded him that he too was his nephew, and as an uncle, it was natural to guide his nephew on the right path. Boston Terrier pointed his finger at Vicar and asked Great Dane why the right path involved throwing a child to a mastiff. The Great Dane replied that this path was much better than getting involved with a stupid and boring pitbull. While Vicar looked at his uncles, he thought to himself that as expected, they had come with the intention of recruiting him. Among the 7 knights representing Baskerville, 2 of them wanted to recruit him for the Pitbull and Mastiff Knights. Before regressing, Vicar would have liked it since they were the elite with guaranteed success. While he was taking a piece of meat to his mouth, he looked at his uncles disdainfully and thought that now they simply seemed like a bunch of stray dogs. Hugo interrupted the conversation between Great Dane and Boston Terrier. Then while the butler was pouring him some wine and a glass, he explained to them that the younger brothers were always noble and arrogant, and he also added that the head of the house was happy to see them, showing affection for the young master. While Vicar was watching his father drink from the glass of wine, he thought that the chief steward always gave a hopeful interpretation, and he also thought that Hugo enjoyed watching his younger brothers fight. Boston Terrier caught his attention and addressed him as his dear nephew to ask if he had spent the last 2 years in La Rouge at Lenore Mountains. He also asked how many barbarians and monsters he had killed. He asked him to share his forest experiences with him. Great Dane also caught Vicar's attention to tell him that he was also concerned about knowing how his nephew had spent that time in the dangerous forest, and he also added that he was curious about his growth in the forest. Hugo interrupted the conversation and asked his brothers not to pressure him and asked them to let him eat. Great Dane asked Hugo if he felt curious, and Boston Terrier explained that he couldn't resist curiosity, so he hurried back as soon as possible to attend the grand banquet. At that moment, Hugo got angry and asked both of them that it was enough already. Upon hearing this, Great Dane and Boston Terrier felt the immense pressure coming from their older brother's words. Hugo stood up from his chair with a killer aura, and while holding a piece of meat with his fork, he reminded them again that he didn't like to say things twice. Both calmed down and decided to stop talking anymore. But at that moment, Vicar also stood up from his chair, and while looking at his two uncles, he explained to everyone that it wasn't difficult to prove his achievements. Upon seeing that Vicar had gotten up, Hugo looked at him and reminded him that he had traveled a long distance. He asked if it wouldn't be exhausting to make it all the way to the drill hall. Vicar looked at Hugo and replied that it was fine. Then he extended his hand and touched the table, explaining to everyone that he could showcase his skills at a time and anywhere. He also asked them if everyday life wasn't an extension of training. He caught the attention of his uncle Boston Terrier and revealed that there was too much wine in his glass. Then he caught the attention of his uncle Great Dane and disclosed that his steak was not well done, leaving both surprised and somewhat confused. While he was touching the table, he began to concentrate, and after several seconds, his finger started to release a bit of his mana. Vicar directed that mana towards the wine glass and the steak plate, causing the steak to cook perfectly and making sure the wine glass had the perfect amount of wine. The Great Dane pierced the meat with his fork and was impressed to see that it was cooked perfectly. Boston Terrier took the wine glass and, upon seeing that it had the perfect amount of wine, started laughing. Boston Terrier explained to everyone that when Vicar placed his hand on the table, he had used mana to cook the meat and heat the wine. He was surprised to see that he had reached the intermediate level of graduation at 17 years old, when normally one would reach that stage at 33 years old. He also shared his thoughts that his older brother Hugo must feel proud to have a son who had mastered all these techniques. Hugo simply drank from his wine glass and listened to the praises of his younger brother towards his son. Vicar looked towards Highborough, Middleborough and Lowborough and thought that this was very strange because 2 years ago he thought he had revealed his abilities as a mid-ranker graduate when he fought against Madam. He never thought that anyone would know until now. He looked at the 3 boys who were looking at him with admiration and thought they must know about his abilities. He also started to wonder why they didn't inform anyone. At that moment, someone caught his attention by calling him little brother to praise him for working very hard. The person who had praised him was Osiris Le Baskerville, first in line for succession, and the Baskerville family's eldest son. While holding his wine glass, he once again praised Vicar for doing a good job and also asked him to continue working harder in the future. Vicar, somewhat confused, thanked his older brother and began to wonder if Osiris had just praised him. Osiris was the first successor in line for the current Baskerville family and also resembled Hugo the most. Vicar still couldn't believe that Osiris was praising him. He started wondering if he was being evaluated by him. Then another person who had just placed his wine glass on the table told everyone that it was surprising to see the older brother praising his younger brother. This person was Set Le Baskerville, second in line for succession, and the Baskerville family's second oldest son. He looked at Vicar and revealed to everyone that this was the first time he had seen older brother Osiris praise someone with such a bright and joyful smile. He also told Vicar that he had a poker face just like his brother Osiris and asked if by any chance he knew his older brothers. Vicar looked at him somewhat confused and replied that he was very aware of who his brothers were. Set looked at him, and with a joyful smile, he was glad that his younger brother knew him. He then explained that because he was very weak, he always stayed in the medical wing or at the isolation training hall. He also added that his training hall was very close to Underdog where Vicar was deputy consul. He planned to pay him a visit, so he asked if he could share his experience of the deep forests. Vicar, with a lost gaze, looked towards nothingness and thought that his bright attitude, which was very different from being a Baskerville, had not changed. During the fall, Vicar had the opportunity to serve under Set, so there were moments when they were together. In the midst of the chaos of battle, he was the only one who comforted the fallen bloodhounds. He even comforted Vicar, who was soaked in blood wandering through the battlefield. Even when Vicar was falsely accused, he remained by his side defending him until the end. With a cheerful smile, Set told Vicar that he would be under his care. Set was the only person Vicar wanted to meet at this banquet. At that moment, Vicar's expression changed drastically as he began to smell a disgusting stench that had been lingering since before. This repugnant odor was something only he could sense, as it had been present during the fall. This repugnant odor was the smell of demon. He quickly realized there was a hidden demon among the people present at the grand banquet. Vicar looked at everyone and started wondering where the source of this disgusting stench was. He closed his eyes, and after several seconds he opened them again and stared at a person. This person was holding his wine glass. He was Set, who had demon hands covering his body. He stared intently and with a smile asked Vicar, "Is there something you need?" This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.